Good morning. Today we have a very exciting topic about blockchain technology and decentralization in general. Our subject matter expert don't no need to be introduced because he is the expert of the field and a pioneer in decentralization research. Please help me welcome today Dr. Wulf Kaal, Juris Doctor, PhD.
This blockchain continuing education program is brought to you by our major sponsors: HTML Coin, Utility Coin Beyond the Hype; Altash University, your online school in the fourth industrial revolution; Libra Codes, take control on your NFT creation; and Credence Hub, verified credentials, anytime, anywhere. We also would like to thank our partners.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Good morning, Dr. Kaal. We're excited again in this wonderful day about your book titled Decentralization Technology Impact on Organization and Social Structure. We are discussing today about chapter 2 of your book. And I know from reliable sources that your book is used in the graduate level in the College of Law. Would you like to give an introduction about that? How is it being used? And I think I heard that you also developed a course on decentralization for law students in your home university.
Yes, thank you. So I'm very excited that my associate dean and the law school here have decided to accept this book as a full as a material for the full course on decentralization. That is a prerequisite course for my courses on coding for lawyers. And so the book helps me get the students ready for the coding solutions that I then teach to create new legal solutions through code. So there's two courses. There's the book on decentralization and a course called Decentralization, Tech and Policy. And then the second course is Coding for Lawyers, that uses the theoretical knowledge and the framework and vision knowledge from the decentralization course and then builds code. The students are required to write code for new legal solutions that help propel and expand that vision that's described in the book.
Oh, this is so exciting. So you just don't do research. So you basically, this book is a product of your research, and then you put it in practice by teaching it to your students. So it is a pioneering work.
Yes, so the book is the result of 10 years of research in decentralized governance. So this is a summary book of the work that I've done with Craig Calcaterra, who's a dynamical systems mathematician, and I come to it as a new institutional economist. And so we wrote the book together to summarize many of the papers that we've written over the past decades.
Oh, that is very interesting because you are looking at the theory and practice of decentralization in as an economist lens, in an economist perspective.
Yes. So I come to it as an institutional economist, been trained as such, studied full economics and full law. And new institutional economists care about institutions. And so institutions are defined as the rules of the game, if you want, and governance, right? So governance is at the heart of new institutional economics. And I came to it about 10 years ago with an article that I wrote in Festschrift Kirchner about dynamical governance, which I could talk about because I had my one leg in technology. Up to that point, nobody could at that point talk about dynamical solutions. And so with all the research that I've done ever since, I was able to add to that literature in new institutional economics, and the book summarizes that literature.
Mm-hmm. That is so very interesting. And speaking of economics, here in the International Council of Registered Blockchain Professionals, we're very interesting on the theory and practice of decentralization, the bedrock of the blockchain technology. So one of this concept in decentralization is the sharing economy. Can you please expand on this idea so that our audience would understand how this sharing economy works and go along with the theory and practice of decentralization, the bedrock of blockchain technology?
Yes. Yeah, I'll be very happy to do that. But before we get into sharing economy, we want to talk a little bit about Web 2, right? So the level of decentralization that we currently have in society, we can maybe define as Web 2, and then the sharing economy is part of the Web 2 environment, right?
Mhm,
So Web 2, what is it? So we have different functionalities in Web 2. So we have technology upgrades, we have design patterns, and we have functionality in Web 2. Functionality is typically associated with social networking, media sharing, and user participation. Design platforms now in Web 2, we have very trendy, glossy, and stylish platforms that are using it. And it's all about shortcuts, right? So we are giving users the ability to engage with each other quickly and at a relatively low price. And what I think epitomizes Web 2 levels of decentralization is perhaps Wikipedia. So if you think about how Wikipedia works, and I've been largely motivated by this idea of upgrading Wikipedia, right? So
mhm,
Wikipedia is a very, very, very powerful tool in a bottleneck centralized iteration of the internet that is controlled by certain companies, right?
mhm,
Um, so anybody can contribute knowledge to Wikipedia under the terms of Wikipedia and the way Wikipedia organizes that, right? But it's a very, very powerful knowledge sharing tool that where people contribute for free, really, right?
mhm,
So it's it's an intrinsic motivation, if you want. And this is, I'm very, very motivated by what I'm seeing coming out of Wikipedia. But we have other examples. We have PayPal decentralizing payments. We have Skype decentralizing telecommunications. There's different Web 2 technologies where companies took advantage of the untapped knowledge, right? So these companies, the YouTubes, the Skypes, the PayPals, and all the billionaires that come out of that, they tapped into this untapped knowledge and they literally they conquered it and they utilized it for their own purposes, right?
mhm,
Because the society was ready for that and the users wanted these kinds of services. Yeah. And so the smartphone is another example, right? Fastest adoption rate of all consumer technology. So if you compare this with other technologies, the smartphone is just absolutely outstanding, right? 40% market saturation in 2.5 years. That's unheard of, right? That's just never happened in society before. So if you think about what that means, right? So when in Star Trek, we had 50 years earlier, we had Spock beam me up. We had people communicating on these smartphone devices where they're holding them up, and when the smartphone technology was ready, it created this unparalleled level of decentralization in society where you no longer had to actually show up at your desk to do the job, to talk on the landline. You could go anywhere, right? And we're seeing the extension of that really coming out of the way people work post-pandemic, where this idea of becoming a nomad, digital
mhm,
nomad, is completely acceptable, right? So we're seeing more and more levels of decentralization of how people interact with each other. And I would argue that the smartphone really kicked most of this off. Okay. And it also proliferated social media. So let me say a few words about social media decentralization and decentralized coordination. So social media really allows people who hold marginalized views to form groups online that share their views, right? So we can talk about all the abuses. We can talk about what that means in society, the radicalization of society, how politics has tapped into this, et cetera, et cetera. But what it does do is these views from the edges of society, they can now be promoted in ways that were unheard of. Now there's a lot of, obviously there's fallout of that. Society becomes radicalized in some ways, and there's a lot of critique. But if we only look at the levels of decentralization of society, these views formerly could not have gained that broad adoption. that broad level of adoption. So we're only looking at decentralization right now, and the chaos, the perceived chaos that comes out of that scares a lot of people, right? But there's also enormous power in that, right? And the book talks about what is the power that comes out of these disruptive elements in decentralization of society. So social media also gives it creates this ability of invisible issues to gain traction, right? Because we're bringing people from the edges of the system into social media, and they get a platform there that otherwise didn't exist before in society, right? Because we're living in a centralized, top-down, coordinated society, right? And this increased visibility can transfer the balance of power, right? I think that's really something where politicians get very animated, because they see that this is happening in society. But again, I'm only talking about decentralization of society, right? And here we're talking about the diffusion of power that comes out of social media, and with that come level of decentralization that society hasn't experienced.
One point with decentralization, as you see that decentralization, basically you can put it together with a grassroots movement. Do you think decentralization go hand in hand with democratization?
Okay, so this is a very, very good, important point. Let's talk about Facebook and the Arab Spring in this context, right? So the Arab Spring, the uprising, and Facebook has been widely credited with the beginnings of the Arab Springs, which is the Arab Spring uprising. Now, you might say this is a form of democratization of society, right? The problem is that the way Facebook presents it, it is done, and we can talk about all the abuses of Facebook and how the Facebook algorithm works and how people program biases into algorithms, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is looking at this from 30,000 feet, right? From the level, what does this mean for decentralization of existing structures and the level of decentralization for society, right? Facebook in this instance allowed the circumvention of state-controlled media. So we're talking about a platform company in the Arab Spring circumventing the way society, the Arab society at the time, was run, and the way state-controlled media, quote unquote, manipulated outcomes in their society. So people use this tool, this quote unquote decentralization tool, and I don't want to give Facebook too much credit here. Don't get me wrong, okay? There's huge
Yes.
problems with Facebook that we're hoping to fix, right? But what it did do is it allowed people to use an alternative means of communication and conveyance of information outside of state-controlled media, and that is revolutionary. It was a revolution, and Facebook was used for that outcome. Now you can critique it. You can say, well, that people died, and that's all terrible, right? But what it did do, when we only look at the level of decentralization, it started this, right? It was used as a tool by these protesters, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit, as you say, about the grassroots democratization. If people use technology to discuss and engage with each other and use and create ideas together, over time, in my humble estimation, that can create new structures in society that can create grassroots engagements.
Mm-hmm.
The problem that we're currently facing is we're using technology in ways that control the engagement, right? So Facebook has to testify in Congress about how they're creating these algorithms and what the algorithms do and what biases are part of the algorithms, et cetera, right? But what we do have is we have the ability for almost 3 billion people on Facebook to engage with each other across the globe and discuss things that are important to them through the means of Facebook, and Google, et cetera, right? But what this is they're using technology through this bottleneck, and the bottleneck is controlled. So where I'm coming from in the book is to figure out a way to remove the bottleneck, the top-down controlled bottleneck, with the power that's associated with that, which is Google and Facebook, among others, and give these tool sets to society to coordinate itself and create new forms of grassroots democracy. That's where
Okay.
we're coming from in the book. And technology allows that. We're still very, very early stages, but that's the book talks about how Web3 and governance, decentralized governance in communities, and some people call them DAOs right now, but they're really decentralized communities, how the governance allows that grassroots movement that we talked about. So, and there are different ways to get there. You can implement this in business relationships. We can talk about DeFi and different structures in which new communities are governed themselves. But over time, when these new communities, these decentralized governance communities, when they engage in doing business with each other, over time, these business relationships may also lead to a form of grassroots democracy, where people start realizing they can make a living in DAOs and decentralized communities, where the communities work with each other and members in the community work for themselves and the community at the same time. And this technology allows that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Um, yes, now we're transitioning to Web3. I think our discussion is transitioning to Web3. Before you mentioned about Web2, about this social media,
Yeah.
although they are centralized, governed centrally, and as you see, they're governed uh, like like Facebook, like Twitter. This is centralized, but it enables people to democratize their opinion, voice out, so the decentralization concept goes in, and now we're transitioning now to Web3, where as you said, there is this technology that can offer genuine decentralization, where there is no top down pyramid. Top down is the pyramid schema, but we reverse the pyramid schema, so the grassroots are contributing so that their voices will be heard. So how does the theory and practice of decentralized ledger technology come into the picture?
Okay.
And I think you also mentioned about, I know that although you are a pioneer in DAO, the decentralized autonomous organization, but you went one to coin new terminologies to capture the essence of what you're doing. So can you please help us understand on this transition from Web 2 to Web 3, that you wanted the grassroots to give more voice from the grassroots, not
Yeah.
just top down triangle
Yeah.
schema?
If you don't mind, I would try to illustrate this with a sharing economy.
Sure.
So we're moving from Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3. And the sharing economy is a phenomenon of Web 2. And so what is the share, and can transition into Web 3. So what is the sharing economy? So sharing economy is the utilization of previously idle services and goods and the use of others' property rights and sharing them. And so what we typically think of sharing economy, we think about Uber, Airbnb, Lyft, etc. So we're talking about individuals who connect via platform companies, and share property rights in cars, in homes, or rent in a peer-to-peer form of engagement, right? And that necessitated a reframing of legacy legal regimes and frameworks. Yeah. And we've seen this happen. I mean, we've seen the YouTubes of the world take enormous lawsuits and take enormous risks to reform and reframe these legacy legal regimes, right? And those entrepreneurs, they took that risk. They walked into that risk because they wanted to provide a service, make money off of it, but also provide a service for society. Yeah. And so sharing economy is very, very powerful tool set. The problem is, in my humble estimation, that the the platform companies that are running the sharing economy, they are, while providing an important service as a gateway to Web3, they're also a hindrance in some ways because of the economies of scale that they created for themselves and the profit that they're taking off on top of off the top, if you want, right? So arguably that profit belongs to the people, yeah. And so let me walk through, and Web3 enables that. And so let me walk through a hypothetical and illustration of this very point. So before Web 2, we had taxi companies, right? So New York City, around the globe. How was that organized? So if you wanted to get a ride, you wanted to be transported from point A to point B, what you had to do is you had to call the taxi company. We had telecommunications at that point, but you had to call the taxi company, and through a centralized hub, they would coordinate where the taxi would show up and how the cab was paid, the cabbie was paid. So the passenger would call up, the centralized hub would then contact a given driver. Driver would report back over the phone or other radio, etc., telecommunication, where they were at, and then the centralized hub would dictate, oh, your next ride is at this address, pick up this person and drive it to this point, right? And then we'll call you back for the next ride, right? So highly inefficient in many ways, very centralized, and our entire legal structure was built around that, right? How is the cab driver responsible? Who's liable? And then we created C corps for each cab, New York City, et cetera, with insurance caps on top, and there was a way to mitigate damages that were created by people who drove cabs and injured people, et cetera, right? Because it was a public good. And the legislature, actually in New York City and others, never changed the insurance premiums the way this was coordinated, because so each company, for instance, that had a cap in it, they would have a minimum capitalization, et cetera, because injured individuals would only go to the respective insurance company, and there was no other capitalization in the companies that ran these caps, right? Okay, so that's legal structure, right? That's how we created this. It was a public good, transportation, and we organized society and our legal structures around this public good, transportation. Yeah, and the cab companies made money with it. Okay, so now here comes Web 2, Uber. Uber is seen as this liberator, that used quote unquote radical technology to come in and uses GPS, et cetera, and gives each driver the ability to make a living. And we can discuss the model and how much of a living that is, et cetera, right? But that's what they did. And as a result, anybody in a given city environment was now able to step outside of the cab company and the regulations that came with it and make a living using technology and driving and providing driving services. And so what we did is we used technology, GPS, mobile telephone, all the things that I talked about earlier, as a way to, in the sharing economy, to allow people to make a living with each other and for each other. The problem with this is, and that's great, right? That's where Web3 is going. That's brilliant. It's exactly where this is going, right? So we should all be thankful to Uber and the other sharing economy platform companies that created this transition, right? Where people realize, I don't have to sit on a desk. I don't have to have a resume. I could just drive Uber. Now, that's not a great living necessarily, but it's a lifeline, right? For a lot of people. So, and that never existed before, right? So you don't have to fit into this centralized environment in which certain demands are made on who you are and where you're coming from, et cetera, et cetera. You can be anybody, pretty much, and drive for Uber. Okay, so the problem with this is what? The problem is that Uber and the other platform companies, they're taking 25% off the top. That's a rent-seeking behavior. That 25% really belongs to the people. And to create an infrastructure and a technology platform where that is enabled, where we see people sharing that 25%. That is my personal vision of Web3. That will only ever be possible, in my humble estimation, if we get decentralized governance right. And what is decentralized governance? Decentralized governance here means the autonomous, anonymous networks, people participating in those who don't know each other, who don't know their race, socioeconomic status, all the factors that hold society back. Nobody knows each other, right? But the decentralized technology allows people to work with each other and not bring the worst behavior out that we've seen in Reddit and other platforms that attempted this in centralized platform-based settings, but incentivized good behavior for each other, with each other, and to make a living with each other, right? So think, to go back to the sharing economy hypothetical and example with Uber, imagine there is a technology that allows people to do the right thing, to behave ethically, and together to make a living with each other and for each other, and share that 25% that currently goes to the platform companies among each other, right? That's the vision of the future. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about this idea of work to earn, right? So work to earn really means I don't have to show up at a desk. I can have a quote unquote Uber type job where I work with other people, not in necessarily driving, but any skill set, right? Where people who share a certain skill set work together and with each other in a work to earn environment. And currently that's discussed as DAOs, right? Decentralized autonomous organizations, where in DAOs, people work with each other. It doesn't have to be DAOs. It can just be decentralized community building and communities engaging with each other outside of platform company-based technologies, right? That's what Web3 is about. That's what Web3 is about, freeing the internet and the users of the internet from these services that are provided by the platform-based companies, and giving users the ability to use the internet to make a living with each other, for each other. And out of that, over time, very likely we will see grassroots movements come out, right? Where people start realizing they've worked together in these decentralized governance systems. They made a living in these decentralized governance systems, and now they can start governing themselves.
That is very noble idea.
Yes. So now there are. I'm not saying that we are going to get rid of the government. I'm not saying that. Okay, somebody has to build the roads and the lanterns at night and et cetera, right? So I'm not there. Now there's some radical libertarians who say we should privatize all of this. All we're talking about right now is for people to have alternative income streams in communities in which they work with each other and for each other, work to earn, right? That's really the primary objective right now. Once you liberate people from this need to fit into the existing top-down centralized hierarchical structures, and you allow people to work autonomously and anonymously with each other in these communities, and they're very few right now, very, very, very few. But once that happens, it is conceivable that people start realizing that there are other democratic means available to them, because they make a living outside of these established top-down hierarchical structures. It is possible to consider that over decades, new forms of societal engagements will come out of that. I personally think it's inevitable, but that doesn't mean that we're talking about overthrowing the government, right? So we talk about piracy, political parties, et cetera. One reason why they're not as successful is because they're too radical. Society isn't ready for this, right? So what you need to build is, you need to build technology and enable people to make a living in these new structures with each other, for each other, work to earn environments. And over time, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. People will find new ways to coordinate because they have the technology and the tool sets that allow them to do that. And currently we don't have them. So that's what I'm working on.
Right. It's so wonderful. Those radicalized, decentralized idea that we have to replace the government, total democratization cannot work because decentralization is just one way of giving power to people. It don't have to be a dominant idea in the society.
Yeah.
That everything must be decentralized, but before we go further on the idea of decentralization, DAO, and this blockchain technology, I would like to create a more visible concepts out from those abstract discussion that we just did, so that our audience can observe further. So I see, I see the should I call it Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3 stages of development of technologies and how technology interact with society. The first one is I am talking of two sets of variables here. The first one is the platform, and the second one is the process. The web one, or I don't know, the traditional one, is the platform. The platform is run by a centralized form of platform where people has to call, and even the process is centralized, where you have to take the taxi, and the taxi owner operating has to coordinate with the centralized hub. So both variables on the traditional one, the platform is centralized, and the process where the service is being rendered, they have to coordinate in a centralized group. So how about the Web 2? I think the Web 2 works like this. The platform is centralized, but the process is decentralized, where, Google server, Facebook server, um, Twitter server are centralized, but the process of interacting, creating those data, creating this information is decentralized, where people create their own data and broadcast it. And
Yeah, but who owns the data?
yes, that is why the platform is
Yes,
centralized.
that's
So
right.
the Web3 now, as we are all aspiring, is, the platform is decentralized and the process is decentralized, where the platform is to the distributed ledger, where blockchain technology, I think, will come into the picture, or other forms of technology, where the platform is not owned by a centralized group of people, but democratized, decentralized by all people. They can work autonomously. So this is how I see how the progression works, like centralized, and then centralized, decentralized, and the third one is decentralized, decentralized.
Ah, very,
So
very good analogy. Yeah, that's
you're
good.
right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And, and I am just deducing it out from your work
yeah,
because I've
yeah,
been
yeah.
reading your materials.
Um, the real thing, the real issue here is how were the platform companies ever able to do all of this, right? And it's because of convenience. Because this is the problem of that I face every day, that we have to build decentralized infrastructure, right? The exact same reason why these platform companies could become so powerful is because nobody had built the infrastructure that they created, and they created an infrastructure that tapped into this need for people to engage with each other in the internet in a convenient way, right?
Mhm.
Nobody is going to go out and write their own code to create new apps that nobody else knows about or uses, right? So they wanted to use the service, and the company provided it and charged for it, and people used it for convenience. And people sacrifice their data to Facebook and all the others constantly. I mean, you know this. Every time you
Yes.
you open your browser and you do a search, um, uh, Google shares this data with Facebook, and Facebook advertisers then pop up with this literally instantaneously with this new product that you may buy based on the algorithm that was run on your search pattern, right? So they abuse this process for themselves, but at the same time, they're providing an enormous, valuable infrastructure building service, because we could not talk about Web3 and all the possibilities was it not for the platform companies. So we owe them eternally they abuse the process and they continue to abuse the process, but we still owe them, right? What we need to now think about is the convenience of for users that they created. We need to do the same in Web3. And let's just say there are huge challenges with that, right? So if you look at something like a MetaMask, right? Or
Right.
some of the other competitors that are out there, but a MetaMask, Google and those guys, they would never put a product like this up because they know that users cannot engage with that, right? So they figured out a way to make it easy for users. Same with Apple, right? So iTunes and all these other use systems, right? You will need your grandmother to be able to engage with it and to want to engage with it, right? And it's all about convenience, and that's a huge component in which they conquered the user base and the way people engage with each other, right? And that was the way they were able to build their companies. And I think we owe them, right? There's abuses and there's all kinds of problems that everybody, the society owes these companies, in my view. But we have to upgrade it, right? So how do you get Web3 to user convenience that allows people to understand, I can use this technology in a way that I understand and I want to engage with, that allows me to capture that 25% that currently is charged by the Ubers of the world. That is the real challenge, Armando. Okay, that is where that is what I'm working on, where I am getting into conflicts and every week with engineering teams. Because the engineering team looks at this and says, "What are you talking about? Of course you have to show the user hashes."
Right.
And then, well, people don't want to see hashes because they don't know what it means, so they don't want to engage with it, and they shouldn't have to, right?
Right.
And that's where we're at right now in Web3. You need to deal with hashes and understand what it means, and wallet addresses, and hold your own keys, and all these things that people don't want to do. Okay, so the real challenge is to create technology, Web3 technology, that allows the users the same level of convenience that they're used to from Web3 environments and from the platforms. Because the platforms taught them how to use it. They taught them to give away their data for free, which they know they should never have done, right? But the platform companies got them to agree that this is the prevailing model that everybody agrees to, right? You use Facebook, you're not owning your data. You should be able to sell your own data. But Facebook owns it, so you can't sell your own data, okay? And people don't think about it because we were trained by the platform companies to think that it's okay for them to use our data, okay? And what we have to do in Web3 is we have to create the systems, the conveniences that were created by the platform companies and re-educate users and give users the ability to use this data and own it and want to own it and get goods in exchange for that, and engage with each other in communities to work with each other, right? And that's
Right. I'm sorry to interrupt you that. So I really like the idea right now because I see your pain on dealing with your engineers as you try to implement the idea of decentralization, and then but you are conflicted with the reality that when we start dealing with decentralization, or platform needs to be decentralized now, the problem you see in this in the blockchain technology is you will start introducing the idea of the hashes and all the hassle of learning the technology. And you see, this is where the friction create, because people do not want to adopt complicated things. And and and
people
we
are
have
habitual, yeah.
right,
We're habitual animals. We're lazy, and you need
right,
to be able to engage with that, and you cannot right now. We're asking too much of people in Web3.
right. And that this is the friction where adoption is
Yeah,
really a
that's
challenge
exactly
in
right.
Web3 environment.
Yeah. So there are some companies that I work with that are getting there. They're making it so user friendly that they are able to sign big contracts with certain platform companies, with governments, et cetera, et cetera. And we're making early inroads into this, but only because we're able to create these Web3 systems that are so simple and so easy to use that people want to engage with them. Nobody will ever want to understand what's under the hood, how this thing actually works, and what the
Correct.
technology is that powers it. And they don't have to know, right? Well, all we need to do is we need to create these systems that allow mainstream adoption by creating conveniences for people and giving them new income streams. I think that is absolutely central, right? When you
Mhm.
own, when you engage it on the web, your data is your data. Your engagement is worth something, and you need to get paid for it, right? And I think that is to me, that's the starting point. Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, some people, until we get to that point, you have to build expertise for free. That's going to be a real struggle, right? And I've
Mhm.
seen this in many DAOs that I'm engaged with, where
Mhm.
people only start acting in the systems that I created, acting properly if and when there's payments, right? There's engagement, there's a form of remuneration,
Mhm.
and that depends on expertise building, right? So if you can sell your data, right? That's these systems are already coming, right? You're getting
Mhm.
a free ride if you're sharing your views on a bottle of wine, or sharing your tastes, et cetera, because it's valuable to somebody else, right?
Mhm.
But that's only one aspect of this new work to earn environment. What we really need is the ability for people to build merit that others recognize.
Mhm.
So think of this as a Reddit where where people who engage in Reddit, and time is valuable. This is the other thing, right?
Mhm.
Why would you ever shoot your mouth off on Reddit for free?
Right.
It makes no sense. Okay, just
Right.
if you engage and spend your time there, do it in
Mhm.
a way where your time is valuable and where you're creating something with it, right?
Right.
So do talk on Reddit in a forum in which you're getting reputation tokens. Don't
Right.
talk on Reddit for free. Why would you talk on Reddit for free? In okay, so and we again, Amanda, we haven't built these systems, but imagine a
Right.
Reddit where you can create an expertise tag and talk about something that is near and dear to your heart that you know a lot about, and other
Mhm.
people recognize that you know a lot about this,
Mhm.
and they're giving you credit. And the credit is something that you build over time. And as you're building this credit over time, at some point somebody is going to see this credit, this merit, and want to pay you for it, right? Right now, all these people, they're going on these platforms, spending their valuable time for free. There's
Right.
no charge ever, right? And the system isn't wired to create systems to merit scores, right? That doesn't exist right now, but we need
Right.
to build that, right? And we need to build the infrastructure for people to use their time in ways that they can at least have an expectancy to be paid for the input and the expertise they created with their time, right? Because
Mhm.
time is valuable. All of our time is valuable, right? So, yeah, these are infrastructure pieces that we're all working on.
Right. I have two. Based on our conversation, this I have two things that come to my mind. Just recently, you said that these people are creating data in this platform and they don't own it. Instead of creating data, they should be compensated on those data. And there is a struggle now because these platforms are centralized, and the process is decentralized, and in doing so, democratizes their opinion to the public. They're broadcasting it. So now, going back to the schematic diagram that I just created from this conversation, we need a platform to be decentralized. I think that is your struggle. And now, going back to your struggle, and I also met the same struggle, as we develop software, and you develop software, you talk with your engineers. There is always this pain points where when you say, our goal is to make this platform as easy as possible, like we do, that the users don't have to deal with hashes and all this friction that goes with the technology. But there is this struggle between you and your engineers, because you want this, and the engineers will say they will always want to do this because for them they are still in the thinking of the purist. this
Yes.
decentralized, where I always discuss with them, try to
They
educate it.
literally say, "What are you talking about? This is how Web3 technology works.
Right, right.
This
And
is how it is." It's
right,
like,
right. But
yeah,
there are other ways of doing things. And I feel when you have this group of engineers and their school of thought is the purest one, that the purest means we have to decentralize it. We have to give people with this hashes, all of this purest idea. But we have to do compromises. Subscribe on the idea on hybrid approach. But hybrid, I don't know how you define it, but the struggle is there when you are the head creating this concept that I want this operate in a decentralized platform, but I don't want to give the burden of technology to the user. We want it as seamless as web too. And I think that is the struggle right now. um, but before we go to our next, I have a very important question for you about the incentives of creating decentralized platform. I would like to have our sponsor first before we discuss to the next the chapter.
This blockchain continuing education program is brought to you by our major sponsors: HTML Coin, Utility Coin Beyond the Hype; Utash University, your online school in the fourth industrial revolution; Libra Codes, take control on your NFT creation; and Credence Hub, verified credentials, anytime, anywhere. We also would like to thank our partners.
Welcome back. We're back here at the International Council of Registered Blockchain Professional with Dr. Wulf Kaal, Juris Doctor, Doctor of Philosophy, and we're talking about Chapter 2 of his book, Decentralization, Technology's Impact on Organization and Societal Structure. Dr. Kaal, the last time we discussed is about your struggle with your engineers. Their school of thought is purist, and you
uh,
would like
Armando, I'm sorry,
to
but
solve them.
are you opening another chapter right now?
No, no, I was still
We
sticking
only
on
have 4 minutes
chapter 2.
left, right?
Right, we have about an hour. All about an hour. So the one question that I would like you to answer before we finish this show is, how would you encourage developers to incentivize developers when users are on the idea of decentralizing the structure? So basically, there will be no centralized companies, but you would like a software where people can work on autonomously, uh, and then they can work on their own terms. How would you encourage that?
Okay, so there are th- right now, this what you're describing is discussed under the nomenclature of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, right? And it's a very powerful idea of what you're illustrating here.
Mhm.
So it's this idea that people can work for software companies top down, and their boss tells them what to do and when to write, what code to write, et cetera, et cetera. Or you can write code in a DAO environment in which the community writes the code. And that's exactly what we're doing right now, where somebody writes a piece of code out of this community, and the rest of the community, who are also expert in the exact same language and the exact same skill set, is auditing the code that the first programmer has provided. And you're providing an audit function to the end user, right? So one person from your community writes the code. The rest of the community, who has the same expertise and the same knowledge base and the same power in the system, arguably, is providing an audit of the work product that is then delivered to the end user, right? And so the people who write the code, they have to be incentivized, and the community has to be incentivized to provide the audit, right? So what I'm working on is the system that allows all of those incentives to work together and create this optimized end product for the users, which ideally also is a DAO community.
Mm. Thank you so much, uh, Dr. Kaal, for this wonderful talk today. We
You're
did.
asking great questions, so I'm looking forward to our next series of questions in the next chapter. It'll be very fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, guys, we would like to encourage you at the book of Dr. Kaal, Decentralization, Technology's Impact on Organization and Societal Structure. Buy this. If you are thinking of going to law and taking courses on DAO, Dr. Kaal, if you can take his course and buy his book. So we encourage you to get this book. International Council of Registered Blockchain Professional, we do continuing education here. So these resources are very important for serious people who would like to go through the blockchain technology, blockchain industry. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Kaal, for this wonderful interview. And we're looking forward to having you in the next show.
Yeah, thank you again for your great questions. I really enjoyed this, and I look forward to speaking again next week.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.